The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called for what the species representatives diplomatically termed the human problem, though most of them privately referred to it as that mess with the upstart primates. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Station Nexus Prime hummed with the kind of tension that occurred when beings who had been ruling the galaxy for millennia suddenly found themselves having to acknowledge a species that had barely figured out faster-than-light travel. Chancellor Vexthon adjusted his ceremonial scales because apparently even reptilian overlords had fashion concerns and gazed down at the empty diplomatic podium with the kind of disdain usually reserved for particularly stubborn stomach parasites. His serpentine tongue flicked out, tasting the recycled air that somehow managed to smell of bureaucracy and barely contained hostility. He hissed through his translator, "Are these humans?" Minister Keltura's crystalline form chimed softly as she shifted, refracting the chamber's light into prismatic rainbows that danced across the curved walls. Her voice resonated like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, which was ironic considering she was about as gentle as a neutron star. Perhaps they got lost? Their navigation systems are still quite primitive. Admiral Nextar's compound eyes clicked as his mandibles clattered in what passed for laughter among his species. The sound was roughly equivalent to someone shaking a box of angry beetles, and about as pleasant. More likely they realized the futility of their petition and fled back to their little blue marble. That's when the chamber doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss that seemed to punctuate the Admiral's dismissive comment. The being who strode through moved with the casual confidence of someone who had either never heard the phrase, "know your place," or had heard it so often it had become background noise. Vaughn looked entirely too relaxed for someone walking into a room full of species that could collectively glass his home planet before lunch. He wore what appeared to be a simple dark suit, though the aliens couldn't know that this particular garment had been carefully designed to project exactly the right amount of "I'm not trying to impress you," which should probably worry you more than if I were. Behind him floated a modest cargo container, humming along on repulsors with the kind of mechanical contentment that suggested it contained something either very boring or very dangerous. In the galaxy's experience, humans had a disturbing tendency to make those two categories overlap. "Apologies for the delay," Vaughn said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "Had to make sure the cargo was properly secured. You know how it is with delicate items." Vexthon's scales rippled in a pattern that indicated either extreme annoyance or preparation for violent molting. "Human representative, this council has gathered to address your species' request for—" "Vaughn?" The human interrupted with a smile that somehow managed to be both friendly and absolutely terrifying. "Just Vaughn. If you don't mind. We're all friends here, after all." The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as a diplomatic incident. Keltura's crystalline structure actually dimmed slightly, while Nextar's wings buzzed with the kind of agitation usually reserved for mating disputes or territorial challenges. "You interrupt a Chancellor of the Galactic Council?" Vexthon's voice dropped to a register that had once caused entire star systems to reconsider their foreign policy decisions. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry," Vaughn replied, though his tone suggested he was about as sorry as a cat presenting a dead bird to its owner. "Please, continue. You were saying something about our request for—" He let the sentence hang there, his eyebrows raised in polite inquiry, as if he genuinely couldn't remember what they were all doing there. It was a masterful display of diplomatic passive aggression that made several council members' translators emit small puffs of smoke as they struggled to process the subtext. Vexthon's tongue flicked out again, this time tasting what the humans would have called barely controlled homicidal rage. Your species has petitioned this council for recognition as a, what was the term? Galactic civilization worthy of membership and protection. Ah, yes. Vaughn nodded sagely. Though I think there might have been some miscommunication in the translation. We're not really looking for protection so much as, well, let's call it a cultural exchange opportunity. Admiral Nextar's mandibles clattered again, though this time the sound was more confused than dismissive. Cultural exchange? Your species barely has culture. You've been spacefaring for less than a standard century. Which brings us to the cargo, Vaughn said, gesturing toward the floating container with the enthusiasm of someone unveiling a particularly impressive sandwich. We thought it might be helpful to share some examples of human culture. You know, so you can make an informed decision about whether we'd be a good fit for your organization. The container obediently floated forward and settled onto the chamber floor with a soft thud. Vaughn approached it with the casual air of someone opening a lunchbox, though several security sensors registered energy signatures that made the station's defensive systems take a sudden interest in the proceedings. What emerged from the container looked, to the assembled alien dignitaries, like the most anticlimactic reveal in diplomatic history. Books. Physical paper books. Along with what appeared to be some sort of reading device that looked about as threatening as a particularly sophisticated paperweight, Keltura's harmonic voice took on a note of confused disappointment. These are information storage devices? Oh, much more than that, Vaughn said, carefully arranging the books on the chamber floor with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts or explosive devices. These represent thousands of years of human storytelling, our greatest cultural achievements, you might say. Vexthon's scales shifted to a pattern that roughly translated to, "Are you kidding me right now?" His voice dripped with the kind of condescension that had been refined over millennia of dealing with species who thought they were more important than they actually were. You bring us children's stories? Well, some of them are for children, Vaughn admitted cheerfully, though I think you'll find they're quite sophisticated once you really get into them. This one here, he held up a slim volume, is about a girl and her grandmother dealing with a wolf problem. Fascinating study in conflict resolution and intergenerational cooperation. Admiral Nextar's compound eyes focused on the book with the intensity of someone trying to identify a new type of weapon. And this is representative of your species' highest cultural achievements? Oh, absolutely. We humans have always believed that the stories we tell our young are the most important indicators of who we really are as a people. Vaughn's smile grew slightly wider. After all, those are the stories that shape how the next generation sees the world, aren't they? The assembled council members exchanged glances that roughly translated to, "Is he serious?" and, "Should we just end this now?" Well, Mira, the multi-tentacled technician operating the chamber's recording equipment, made a sound like a deflating balloon, which in her species indicated either extreme boredom or the onset of molting season. Human Vaughn. Keltura chimed with the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to a particularly slow asteroid. While we appreciate your cultural offerings, this council requires evidence of technological advancement, military capability, or strategic value before considering membership applications. "Oh, but that's exactly what I'm offering," Vaughn replied, his tone suggesting that everyone else was missing something obvious. "This reading device here, it's designed to analyze and interpret human cultural data. Think of it as a cultural interface system." He picked up the device, which looked like someone had crossed a tablet computer with a mood ring and possibly a small cosmic horror. It was roughly the size and shape of a book, but its surface seemed to shift and shimmer in ways that made the security cameras develop what could charitably be called performance anxiety. "Perhaps one of you would like to try it?" Vaughn offered, holding the device out toward the council with the helpful demeanor of someone offering directions to lost tourists. "It's quite safe, I assure you. We use them in elementary schools." Vexthon's scales shifted to a pattern that indicated he was considering whether this entire meeting qualified as justifiable homicide. "You expect a member of this council to read your children's books?" "Just for the cultural experience," Vaughn said, his expression radiating the kind of innocent enthusiasm that made seasoned diplomats reach for their emergency evacuation protocols. After all, how can you make an informed decision about humanity without understanding what makes us tick? The chamber fell silent again, except for the soft humming of the cargo container's repulsors and the faint sound of Huxvan, the station's security captain, quietly updating his incident report to include the phrase, "possible human psychological warfare attempt." Finally, Keltura's crystalline form brightened slightly. "Very well. In the interest of thorough diplomatic evaluation, I will examine your cultural interface system." As she moved forward to take the device, Vaughn's smile became positively radiant. "Wonderful," he said. "I think you're really going to enjoy this." Keltura approached the device with the cautious grace of someone who had survived 3 galactic wars and 2 tax audits by never touching anything that glowed without running a full spectral analysis first. Her crystalline fingers, which were actually more like geometric probability clusters given physical form, hovered over the device's surface. "The energy signature, Island. Unusual," she announced, her voice taking on the harmonic frequencies she used when lecturing junior scientists about the dangers of assuming anything involving humans would be straightforward. "It appears to be generating quantum resonance patterns that I've never encountered before." Vaughn nodded with the enthusiasm of a teacher whose student had just asked exactly the right question. "That's the cultural interface calibrating itself to your neural patterns. Completely normal. We had to make it adaptable. You understand different species, different ways of processing information." Admiral Nextar's wings buzzed with agitation. "You're telling us this device can interface directly with alien neural systems?" "Well, not directly," Vaughn said, though his definition of "not directly" seemed to include several concepts that made the station's medical bay automatically prep its emergency xenobiology protocols. "It's more like guided interpretation. The device helps translate human cultural concepts into forms that other species can understand and appreciate." Vexthon's scales rippled in a pattern that roughly translated to, "This sounds like the prelude to either a breakthrough or a war crime." His serpentine neck extended slightly as he focused on the device. "And this technology has been tested?" "Oh yes, extensively," Vaughn assured him. "Every human child uses something similar from the age of 5 onwards. We call it reading comprehension, though I suppose the advanced neural interfacing capabilities might not have been apparent from the name." Welmira's tentacles writhed in what her species considered the equivalent of nervous tentacles writhe, laughter. You give this technology to your offspring? Children are remarkably adaptable, Vaughn replied, with the casual air of someone discussing the weather rather than potentially revolutionary xenotechnology. They pick up the interface protocols much faster than adults. Something about neural plasticity and the willingness to believe in impossible things. Keltura's crystalline structure chimed softly as she made her decision. Her finger, or the geometric construct that served as one, made contact with the device's surface. The result was immediate and, depending on your perspective, either magnificent or deeply alarming. The device came alive with a soft, pulsing glow that seemed to breathe with its own internal rhythm. Patterns of light began flowing across its surface like liquid starlight, and the air around it shimmered with energy discharges that made the chamber's environmental systems emit confused beeping sounds. Fascinating, Keltura murmured, her voice taking on a dreamy quality as the device's interface began integrating with her consciousness. I can feel it mapping my cognitive patterns. It's learning how I process narrative information. That's the cultural adaptation matrix, Vaughn explained helpfully. It needs to understand how you think before it can properly translate human storytelling concepts. Should only take a moment. The moment stretched into something closer to a minute, during which the device's glow intensified and began pulsing in sync with Keltura's natural harmonic frequencies. The other council members watched with the kind of fascination usually reserved for watching someone else test potentially lethal technology. "Ah!" Keltura said suddenly, her voice brightening with comprehension. "I can access the stored narratives now. Let me select something appropriate for diplomatic analysis." She gestured, and the device projected a list of titles in flowing, luminescent text that hung in the air like a menu of cultural possibilities. The names were translated into Galactic Standard, though something about the translations suggested the original meanings were far more complex than they appeared. The three little construction engineers and the aerodynamically challenged wolf, she read aloud. Little Red Riding Hood and the Forest Predator Incident. Goldilocks and the Home Invasion Situation. These titles seem to involve considerable conflict resolution scenarios. All classics, Vaughn confirmed. Though I'd recommend starting with something a bit more comprehensive. Perhaps The Jungle Book? It's an excellent primer on interspecies cooperation and the integration of outsiders into established social hierarchies. Admiral Nextar's mandibles clicked with interest despite himself. This involves military strategy? Leadership dynamics, mostly, Vaughn said, his expression carefully neutral. The story of a human child raised by wolves, learning to navigate the complex social structures of various predator species while maintaining his unique identity and capabilities. Keltura selected the story with a gesture that sent ripples of light cascading across the device's surface. As she began to read, her crystalline form started to glow, with reflected energy from the device, creating a light show that would have been breathtaking if it weren't potentially the prelude to either a diplomatic breakthrough or a xenobiological disaster. The narrative is remarkably complex, she announced, her voice taking on multiple harmonic layers as the device fed information directly into her consciousness. The human protagonist forms pack bonds with various carnivorous species, each with distinct hunting strategies and social hierarchies. The wolves teach him loyalty and cooperation, the bears provide strength and protection, the panther offers stealth and precision. Classic human socialization patterns, Vaughn noted, though something about his tone suggested there were layers to one Penelope. This observation, that wouldn't become apparent until much later. We've always been remarkably good at forming cooperative relationships with predatory species. Vexthon's tongue flicked out, tasting the air with growing unease. This is merely fiction, correct? Entertainment for your juveniles? Oh yes, complete fiction, Vaughn agreed readily. Though it's worth noting that human fiction tends to be based on our deepest cultural truths. The stories we tell children are usually the ones that contain our most fundamental survival strategies. The device's glow was intensifying now, and Keltura's form was beginning to resonate with harmonics that made the chamber's structural supports emit concerned creaking sounds. Energy readings were climbing past recommended levels, but she seemed completely absorbed in the narrative. The human learns to speak with the animals, she continued, her voice dreamy and distant. He becomes part of their society while maintaining his unique capabilities. The wolves accept him as pack, but he brings tools and fire and planning skills that they lack. He becomes their strategic advantage. Symbiosis, Vaughn said softly. We call it symbiosis. Each species contributes what they do best, and together they become more than the sum of their parts. Admiral Nextar's compound eyes were focusing with laser intensity on the glowing device, and the child retains loyalty to both his adopted pack and his original species? That's the beautiful part, Vaughn replied, his smile taking on a quality that made several security sensors quietly upgrade their threat assessment protocols. In human stories, loyalty isn't exclusive. The more connections you make, the stronger you become. The wolf pack doesn't replace the human community. It expands it. Well, Mira's tentacles were writhing with agitation now. The energy readings are approaching dangerous levels. Perhaps we should— It's fine, Keltura interrupted, though her voice was beginning to echo in ways that suggested the device was doing more than just feeding her information. The narrative is teaching me about human bonding protocols. They don't just domesticate animals, they form genuine partnerships. The animals choose to follow them because the humans provide something unique, something valuable. The device pulsed brighter, and for a moment the entire chamber was bathed in shifting patterns of light that seemed to move with purpose and intelligence. When the glow stabilized, something had changed. The air itself felt different, charged with possibility, and the faint sense that rules were being rewritten in real time. How do you feel, Minister? Vex? Thon asked, his voice carefully controlled, though his scales were shifting through warning patterns, like a reptilian mood ring having an identity crisis. Kel. Tura looked up from the device, and her crystalline eyes were glowing with internal light that definitely hadn't been there when the session started. I feel enlightened. The human approach to interspecies relationships is far more sophisticated than we assumed. They don't simply dominate other creatures. They inspire loyalty through genuine partnership and mutual benefit. That's lovely, Admiral Nex, Tar said, though his tone suggested he found it about as lovely as a plasma leak in his ship's reactor core. Perhaps you should disconnect from the device now. Oh, I don't think that's necessary, Kel, Tura replied, her harmonics taking on new frequencies that made the translator systems emit small sparks. I'm learning so much. Did you know that in human culture, the stories always end with the formation of new family units? The protagonist doesn't just survive, they create lasting bonds that transform everyone involved. Vaughn was still smiling, but now there was something in his expression that reminded the observant viewer that humans were, technically speaking, apex predators who had conquered their planet through a combination of tool use, pack cooperation, and an alarming willingness to adopt anything that moved as either a friend or a food source. "Perhaps," he suggested gently, "you'd like to continue reading? There are so many more stories to experience. And the device is just getting started with the cultural integration process." The device pulsed again, brighter this time, and in that pulse of light, something flickered just for a moment that looked suspiciously like tiny, adorable creatures with large eyes and an unmistakable expression of devotion. But that was probably just a trick of the light. Probably. The device had been humming contentedly for the better part of an hour, during which Keltura had worked her way through what Vaughn cheerfully described as the essential human childhood canon. She'd absorbed tales of brave little tailors defeating giants through cleverness, woodsmen forming alliances with talking animals, and children who somehow managed to turn potentially fatal encounters with predators into lasting friendships through a combination of wit, kindness, and what could only be described as weaponized optimism. With each story, the device's glow had intensified, and Keltura's crystalline form had begun resonating with harmonics that made the station's quantum stabilizers emit increasingly concerned beeping sounds. But it wasn't until she started reading Where the Wild Things Are that things got truly interesting. "This narrative structure is remarkable," she announced, her voice now carrying undertones that definitely hadn't been there when the session started. "The human child doesn't fear the monsters. He becomes their king through force of personality and strategic alliance building. The wild creatures submit to his authority not through violence, but through charisma," Vaughn supplied helpfully. "We call it charisma, the ability to inspire loyalty and cooperation through personal magnetism and demonstrated competence." Admiral Nextar's wings buzzed with agitation that was rapidly approaching panic. "Minister Keltura, your biometric readings are showing significant alterations. Perhaps you should step away from the device." "But I'm learning so much about human pack dynamics," Keltura replied, her harmonics taking on frequencies that made several nearby data terminals spontaneously display heart-shaped emoticons. "Did you know that in human society, the most successful leaders are those who inspire genuine affection rather than mere obedience? It's a completely different approach to social hierarchy than anything we've encountered." Vexthon's scales were now cycling through warning patterns so rapidly they created a sort of reptilian strobe effect. "Human Vaughn, what exactly is your device doing to our colleague?" "Oh, just facilitating cultural understanding," Vaughn replied, with the innocent enthusiasm of someone who had definitely not spent the last several months carefully engineering this exact scenario. "The human bonding process can be quite intense for species that aren't familiar with it. But don't worry, the effects are completely benign." That's when the device decided to make a liar out of him. With a pulse of light that temporarily blinded the chamber's sensors, the device projected a holographic announcement that appeared in letters 3 feet tall, glowing with the kind of internal radiance usually associated with small stars or very expensive advertising displays. "Cultural integration complete," the message declared in perfect galactic standard. "Initiating loyalty. Protocol demonstration." The silence that followed was the kind usually found in the moments between lightning and thunder, or between a diplomat saying, "Trust me," and the inevitable interstellar incident. Loyalty protocol? Vexthon's voice had dropped to the register he usually reserved for declaring wars or announcing the execution of particularly annoying bureaucrats. Before Vaughn could answer, though his expression suggested he was having far too much fun to provide a straight answer. Anyway, the device pulsed again, and the holographic text was replaced by something that made every security system in the station simultaneously achieve consciousness just long enough to file a complaint with the universe. Predator cubs, loyal only to the human, the announcement proclaimed, and suddenly the air around the device began shimmering with small, adorable shapes that definitely hadn't been there moments before. They looked like someone had taken every appealing characteristic of Earth's most beloved predators: the loyal eyes of wolves, the playful curiosity of big cats, the protective instincts of bears, and distilled them into creatures roughly the size of house cats, but with the unmistakable aura of beings that could, if necessary, take on something considerably larger than themselves. And they were all looking at Vaughn with expressions of absolute, unwavering devotion. "Ah," Vaughn said, his tone suggesting he was as surprised by this development as someone who had spent months planning it could reasonably be. That would be the secondary function activating. Admiral Nextar's mandibles were clicking so rapidly they sounded like an old-fashioned typewriter operated by someone having a seizure. Secondary function? What was the primary function? Cultural analysis and behavioral pattern recognition, Vaughn explained. While one of the glowing creatures, this one resembling a wolf cub with eyes like liquid starlight, padded over to him and began nuzzling his hand with obvious affection. The device needed to understand how different species process the concept of loyalty before it could demonstrate humanity's particular approach to interspecies cooperation. Vaughn's smile, Vexthon asked, with the careful enunciation of someone trying very hard not to lose his temper in front of witnesses, "Is humanity's particular approach?" Vaughn's smile became positively radiant. As more of the creatures began materializing, each one immediately gravitating toward him with the kind of instant, absolute trust, usually reserved for religious experiences or very effective brainwashing. "We make friends," he said simply, "with everything. It's our species' greatest survival trait, and, as it turns out, our most exportable technology." Keltura, who had been watching the proceedings with the fascinated attention of someone whose worldview was being systematically demolished and rebuilt, chimed in with harmonics that now included frequencies that made the universal translators display small hearts next to her words. The stories weren't just entertainment, she realized, her crystalline form brightening with comprehension. They were instruction manuals, teaching human children how to form bonds with potentially dangerous creatures, how to inspire loyalty through genuine care and mutual benefit, how to turn predators into protectors. Every human child learns these patterns, Vaughn confirmed, as a creature that looked like a tiny bear with the intelligence of a tactical computer began climbing up his arm to perch on his shoulder. "We call them fairy tales, but they're actually our species' collected wisdom about surviving in a universe full of things that could eat us." Admiral Nextar was staring at the creatures with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for watching natural disasters or political campaigns. "And these are what exactly?" "Quantum biological constructs," Vaughn said, as if this explained everything instead of raising approximately 15,000 new questions. "The device analyzed your neural patterns, your species' psychological profiles, your cultural frameworks, and then generated companions specifically designed to appeal to your deepest instincts for protection and nurturing. One of the creatures, this one looking like a cross between a panther and a pocket-sized dragon, had wandered over to Keltura and was looking up at her with eyes that seemed to contain the accumulated trust of every pet that had ever existed. "It's so small," Keltura whispered, her harmonics taking on protective frequencies that made the chamber's defense systems automatically lower their threat assessment levels. "So vulnerable. And yet," Vaughn pointed out, "you can sense that it would defend you with its life if necessary, that it would choose your safety over its own without hesitation. That level of loyalty isn't something you can program it as to be freely given." "Well," Mira's tentacles were writhing with agitation. "But how is this possible? These creatures appear to have genuine consciousness, genuine emotions." "Oh, they do," Vaughn assured her, while the bear creature on his shoulder began making small, contented rumbling sounds. "The device doesn't create artificial intelligence. It creates genuine relationships. The consciousness emerges from the bond itself." Vex, Thon's scales had shifted to a pattern that roughly translated to, "I am having an existential crisis," and also possibly a nervous breakdown. His voice, when he managed to speak, carried the tone of someone whose understanding of the universe had just been fed through a blender. "You're telling us that humanity has developed technology that can create living beings whose sole purpose is absolute loyalty to other species." "Not quite," Vaughn said, his expression growing slightly more serious. "The loyalty isn't programmed. It's chosen. These creatures have free will, genuine consciousness, and the ability to make their own decisions. They choose loyalty because that's what the human bonding model teaches, that genuine relationships are based on mutual benefit, trust, and affection." As if to demonstrate this point, one of the creatures, a wolf-like being with silver fur and eyes like captured moonlight, padded over to Admiral Nex, Tar, and sat down in front of him, tail wagging, hopefully. The Admiral stared down at the creature with the kind of expression usually seen on the faces of hardened military commanders who had just been offered cookies by their grandmother. It wants something from me," he said, his voice uncertain. "Friendship," Vaughn explained. "It's offering you partnership, loyalty, protection, and companionship in exchange for care, affection, and the opportunity to be useful. It's the most basic human social contract, and apparently it translates remarkably well across species barriers." The creature looked up at Nex, Tar with an expression of hopeful expectation that somehow managed to convey both complete trust and the promise of fierce protection. Without quite realizing what he was doing, the Admiral reached down and gently touched the top of the creature's head. The result was immediate and unmistakable. The creature's tail began wagging with increased enthusiasm, and next, Tar's expression shifted from confusion to something that looked suspiciously like wonder. "I can feel its thoughts," he said softly. "Its emotions. It's genuinely happy to meet me. And you," Vaughn observed, "are genuinely happy to meet it. That's how the human bonding process works. It creates genuine emotional connections that benefit everyone involved." Hux Vaughn, the station's security captain, who had been observing from the chamber's perimeter with the professional paranoia of someone whose job involved preventing exactly this kind of unprecedented diplomatic incident, stepped forward with his weapons systems carefully powered down. "Sir," he addressed Vex, Thon, should I consider these creatures a security threat? One of the beings. This one, resembling a miniature lion, with a mane that seemed to be made of concentrated courage, approached Hux, Thon, and sat down in front of him with the patient dignity of someone waiting to be properly introduced. Hux, Thon started, then stopped. His massive, armored form seemed to deflate slightly as he looked down at the creature. It's not threatening at all, is it? It's just, it wants to be friends. That, Vaughn said with satisfaction, is exactly the point. Humanity's greatest weapon isn't superior technology or military might. It's our ability to turn potential enemies into genuine allies through the simple act of caring about their well-being. The chamber had filled, with more creatures now, each one unique, each one gravitating toward a different member of the assembled group, with the kind of instant recognition that suggested the device had been analyzing far more than just cultural patterns. Tura was now surrounded by 3 small beings that seemed to be made of living crystal, their surfaces reflecting her light in patterns that created a constant, gentle light show. Well, Mira had attracted a group of creatures with multiple appendages that moved in perfect synchronization with her tentacles, creating an intricate dance of mutual acknowledgement. And Vex, Thon, despite his obvious attempts to maintain diplomatic composure, was being approached by a creature that looked like a small dragon, with scales that shifted through the same patterns as his own emotional displays. "This is impossible," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "This is humanity," Vaughn replied. "We looked at a universe full of bigger, stronger, faster species, and instead of trying to beat them, we decided to befriend them. And, as it turns out, friendship is the most powerful force in the galaxy." The device pulsed one final time, and the holographic text reappeared. "Demonstration complete. Loyalty protocols established. Awaiting further instructions." Vaughn looked around the chamber at the assembled aliens, each now accompanied by creatures that gazed at them with obvious affection and unwavering loyalty. "So," he said conversationally, "shall we discuss humanity's application to join the Galactic Council?" The G6? Silence in the chamber stretched for exactly 15 seconds. Long enough for each council member to glance around at their new companions, experience a moment of species-appropriate panic, and then look back at Vaughn with expressions that ranged from bewildered admiration to the kind of suspicion usually reserved for street magicians and used starship salespeople. Admiral Nex Tar was the first to break the quiet, his voice carrying the strained tone of someone whose entire military worldview had just been gently but thoroughly demolished by something roughly the size of a houseplant. "You're suggesting," he said slowly, while the silver wolf creature at his feet gazed up at him with eyes full of unwavering devotion, "that humanity's contribution to galactic civilization island? Friendship? Not just friendship," Vaughn corrected, though his tone suggested he was enjoying this conversation far more than any reasonable diplomat should. Strategic partnership. Mutual benefit arrangements. The kind of loyalty that turns separate species into unified communities. And these creatures, Vex's Thon gestured toward the small dragon-like being that had positioned itself protectively near his feet, are your proof of concept? The dragon creature, whose scales were now matching Vex Thon's emotional patterns with uncanny accuracy, made a soft rumbling sound that somehow conveyed both contentment and readiness to defend its chosen partner against any threat. up to and including existential dread and bureaucratic incompetence. More than that, Vaughn said, his expression growing more serious. They're volunteers. Keltura, who had been harmonizing softly with her crystal companions, in frequencies that made the chamber's acoustic systems spontaneously compose what sounded like a lullaby, looked up with sudden understanding. Volunteers? You mean they chose to be here? The device didn't create them, Vaughn explained, settling into what was clearly a prepared revelation, with the satisfaction of someone whose elaborate plan was finally reaching its crescendo. It called them. Every creature in this room answered a summons broadcast across quantum dimensions, a call for beings willing to form bonds with alien species for the purpose of mutual protection and cooperation. Well, Mira's tentacles went very still, a sign of either deep thought or impending molting. You're saying these creatures came from? Where exactly? Think of it as a pocket dimension, Vaughn said, while the bear creature on his shoulder made encouraging rumbling sounds. A space that exists between realities, populated by beings who embody the platonic ideal of loyal companionship. They've been waiting for someone to figure out how to make contact. Waiting for humans, you mean? Admiral Nextar said, though his tone had shifted from suspicion to something approaching awe. Waiting for any species that understood the true nature of predator-prey relationships, Vaughn corrected. The fact that it turned out to be humans is probably because we're the only species crazy enough to look at something with big teeth and think, I bet we could be friends. Hux Vaughn, who had been quietly allowing his lion-maned companion to inspect his armor with obvious fascination, spoke up from his position near the chamber's security station. Sir, he addressed Vexthon, I'm detecting some unusual energy signatures from the creatures. They appear to be quantum entangled with their chosen partners. Meaning what, exactly? Vexthon asked, though his scales were shifting to patterns that suggested he was beginning to suspect the answer wouldn't be simple. Meaning, Vaughn said cheerfully, that they're now permanently bonded to you. Distance, time, dimensional barriers, none of that matters anymore. They'll always be able to find you, protect you, and come to your aid regardless of where you are or what's trying to eat you. The implications of this statement hung in the air, like a diplomatic bomb that someone had forgotten to mention was actually a diplomatic bomb until after it had already exploded. Permanently? Keltura's harmonics took on frequencies that made her crystal companions glow brighter in response. Well, Vaughn said, with the tone of someone delivering the fine print, until you die, or until you explicitly release them from the bond, though I should mention that in the entire recorded history of human-animal partnerships, voluntary dissolution of loyalty bonds has a success rate of approximately 0%. Admiral Nextar looked down at the silver wolf creature, which looked back up at him with an expression of such complete trust and devotion that the Admiral's compound eyes actually began leaking what could charitably be called moisture. It really means it, he said softly. The loyalty. It's not programmed or artificial. It's genuine. That's the beautiful thing about the human approach, Vaughn said, his voice taking on the warm tone of someone explaining something dear to their heart. We never figured out how to fake genuine relationships, so we just learned how to create real ones instead. But why? Vexthon's voice carried the confusion of someone whose entire understanding of interspecies politics had just been replaced with something resembling a children's story. What do humans gain from this arrangement? Vaughn's smile became absolutely radiant. Everything. protection, companionship, loyalty, love, and the knowledge that we're never truly alone in the universe. Plus, and this is the practical part, every creature bonded to a member of this council is now essentially a human ally. The silence that followed this statement was pregnant with implications that made the chamber's diplomatic analysis computers emit small puffs of smoke as they tried to calculate the political ramifications. "You're creating a network," Keltura realized, her crystalline form brightening with comprehension. "Every bond, every partnership, every friendship, it's all connected back to humanity." "Not connected," Vaughn corrected gently. "Allied. There's a difference. We're not looking to control anyone. We're looking to build a community where everyone benefits from everyone else's strengths." Admiral Nextar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "And if someone threatens a member of this community?" The response came not from Vaughn, but from the creatures themselves. Every single being in the chamber, wolves, bears, dragons, crystals, and everything in between, turned toward the Admiral, with expressions that managed to convey both perfect innocence and absolute readiness for violence. "They tend to take threats to their chosen partners rather personally," Vaughn said mildly. "And since they're quantum entangled across dimensional boundaries, threatening one essentially means threatening all of them, plus their partners, plus everyone their partners care about. This is either the most brilliant diplomatic strategy in galactic history," Vexthon said slowly, "or the most elaborate scheme for universal conquest ever devised." "Why not both?" Vaughn asked with genuine curiosity. "Though I prefer to think of it as friendship with benefits. Very, very effective benefits." Well, Mira's tentacles began writhing with what her species considered intellectual excitement. The implications are staggering. If humanity can facilitate these bonds between any species, then the entire concept of interstellar warfare becomes obsolete, Vaughn finished. Hard to fight someone when doing so would make every loyal companion in the galaxy personally upset with you. "Hux!" Vaughn, who had been listening with the professional attention of someone whose job involved understanding threats to galactic security, cleared his throat. "Human Vaughn," he said formally, "are you telling this council that humanity's application for membership is actually a proposal for restructuring the entire basis of galactic civilization?" "Well," Vaughn said, glancing around at the assembled aliens and their new companions, "when you put it like that, it sounds rather ambitious. I prefer to think of it as scaling up a successful small group dynamic." Kel. Tura's harmonics took on frequencies that suggested she was either having a revelation or a breakdown. "You're not asking us to protect humanity. You're offering to protect us. And everyone we care about," Vaughn confirmed, "and everyone they care about, and so on, until the entire galaxy is essentially one big, slightly dysfunctional, but ultimately loving family." Thon looked around the chamber one more time, taking in the sight of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, being adopted by creatures that radiated love, loyalty, and just enough potential for violence to make everyone feel safe. "This council," he said finally, "votes to accept humanity's application for membership in the Galactic Alliance. All in favor?" The vote was unanimous, though it was somewhat difficult to count due to the fact that several council members were busy being nuzzled by their new companions. "Motion carries." "Vex," Thon announced, "welcome to the galaxy, humanity." As Vaughn walked toward the chamber's exit, followed by his bear companion and trailed by a procession of alien dignitaries who were still trying to process what had just happened to their carefully ordered universe, he paused at the threshold. "Oh," he said, turning back with the helpful expression of someone who had just remembered something important. "I should probably mention that we've got about 50,000 more of those devices ready for distribution. You know? For when other species want to join the community." The last sound heard in the chamber was Admiral Nex, Tar's mandibles clicking in what could have been laughter, terror, or possibly both. Outside, Hux Vaughn was already filing his incident report under the heading "Successful Diplomatic Revolution via Weaponized Friendship. Recommend immediate galaxy-wide implementation." The universe, it seemed, was about to become a much more interesting place.